My name is Gideon Barker. I founded a business called Customer IQ, which is a research consultancy specifically aimed at working with founders and startups. I've spent a bit of time on Business Accelerator and in the kind of startup world, and have identified a real need, I think, for startup businesses, early stage startups particularly, to get more of a steer on their customers, on their markets. Often I've found people are doing their own research, obviously as a result of cost. And I guess one of the things that I'm trying to do with these webinars, but also with some new services that I'm launching around sort of the idea of coaching, is to try and encourage people to do their own research, but try and help them to get a better result at the end of it. So lots of webinars to come on various topics related to research. This one is, I guess the kind of broad aims of today really are threefold. I want to be able to give people a little bit more confidence in thinking about doing their own research. So for some it's a bit daunting. For some, it's not so daunting. It certainly isn't rocket science. It certainly isn't brain surgery. But there are ways that you can get it wrong. So I want to just cover off the process that I go through today very quickly, so that to try and give you a bit more confidence when you want to start doing your own research. The second thing, the steps, really just to cover off the process that I go through, and this process is the one that I use for all my client work, and we'll go through that step by step. And thirdly, a few insights, maybe a few things to think about, a few insider bits of understanding about how this might work. So I will proceed. The process. So broadly, this is the process that I follow with all of the research that I do, all of the paid research that I do. It's not a bit of IP that I protect with any legal protection. It's a pretty standard approach. I'm going to go through each of these steps one by one. We'll probably spend just about 5 minutes on each one. So by no means we're going to cover this in great detail. And if you do have questions, I do have hopefully got 4 or 5 minutes at the end where I can ask some questions. So as we're going through, if there's something you're not sure about, or if you want to ask for some clarity or a related topic, hold off to the end if we can, and then I'll answer those in one go. So this is the kind of 4-stage process that I go through: setting objectives, setting up the project, collecting data, doing the analysis, and then the debrief at the end. So let's go through that one by one. Setting objectives. I don't know if you may have read a couple of posts about me kind of banging on about this before, but for me, this is by far and away, the most important step in the process is getting those objectives right. And that covers all manner of things, from the scope of the project. I think it's very tempting when you're doing a piece of research to kind of try and find out everything about everyone, and that's not going to lead to a particularly effective piece of research. I think you need to be careful about what the scope of that research is, what's in scope and what's out of scope. The objectives. Sorry, it's starting to hail outside my window. I don't know if you can hear that. Crazy weather. Objectives also influence, we'll come on to talk about this, what kind of methodology you might use to collect the data. So really important as well to kind of help you with the analysis, the questions that you're going to write, and ultimately for success, right? So if you have very clear objectives, then they're going to help guide you through that whole process, and you're going to get a better piece of research at the end. How are you going to kind of create your objectives? I'm not going to kind of run through the principles of SMART objectives and all that kind of thing. I think everyone's probably pretty much aware of that. But I would definitely start with the business. I think it's tempting to kind of launch into research objectives early. What are the kind of things we want to find out? Actually, start at the beginning. Start before that. Start at the business needs to know. So ask yourself some questions like, what is it the business needs to know to move forward? If you're launching a new product, you'll need to know more about how the customers are relating to that product, how they're finding it, what they like, what they don't like. What decisions need to be made from this research? Is it a case of I'm doing some research, testing out a couple of different brand routes for a client. So ultimately the decision that needs to be made on the back of that research is which route might we take for our new kind of brand strategy. What work needs to be done on the back of the insight that you're going to gain from this research? So what kind of work streams, what kind of roadmap is this research, this insight going to feed into? And what are the timings of all of this? Where are those critical moments? No point doing a piece of research that might take you 6 weeks to deliver if you need to make a decision next week. So think about all of those things and how it applies to the business before you start thinking about research objectives. And as I've already said, the objective setting, sorry to kind of repeat this point, but I think it's really important that the objectives themselves are going to help inform the rest of the process, but also make sure that project, the research that you're doing is successful. So objectives will help you in the setup. We'll come on to the setup in a moment. What kind of questions are you going to be asking? Objectives will determine, to a large extent, the type of methods, the way that you might collect that data. Your objectives become a nice framework for you to then conduct your analysis and communicate your findings to your stakeholders. So I won't say it again, but objectives really important, definitely worth spending some time on that element before you're launching into kind of the research proper. Setup. Apologies for the kind of clip art here, but I think what this boils down to really are some fundamental things that you need to make a research project work. So you need some questions. You don't need a clipboard, but you do need some questions. You potentially need some tech. You need some way of if you're doing a survey, you're going to need some software to program that survey. You're going to need something like SurveyMonkey or Typeform or something else, so you can set those questions up and distribute them to the people that you want to research. So you're going to need some people, right? You're going to need to have to think about who, what profile, what are they? Are they customers? Are they potential customers? What specification can you're going to determine, and timelines as well. What's going to happen when. Planning the process, from beginning to end, so that you can keep to that kind of rhythm. So essentially, some basic things that need to be done at the setup phase: the what, the how, the who, and the when. In terms of data collection, I think this, each of these kind of steps would potentially become, multiple webinars in themselves. It's not possible to kind of cover off all of the possible kind of forms of data collection within this webinar, but I would happily kind of do more on this if this is of interest for people. But broadly, the ways of collecting data fall into two camps. You have quantitative data collection methods and you have qualitative data collection methods, and these get confusing. This it irritates me that the research industry has so much jargon, and here we have classic bit of jargon. Quantitative, essentially what we're talking about there are large samples of people, so large pools of people asking questions like what, when, how. So we're classically going to do quantitative research through a survey, but as we'll see, it doesn't have to be done that way. Qualitative research, much smaller samples. So we're going into much more detail with a smaller group of people. So we're asking the question why much more. You want to really dig in to a particular topic or a particular behaviour. Then you would consider qualitative methods, and it's not a kind of either or. Both methods have their kind of merits. Very much ties in with what the objectives of the research are all about. Are you trying to kind of measure market, the size of your market? Are you trying to get some detailed feedback on a prototype or a kind of minimum viable product? So it very much the objectives of the research will kind of determine the kind of methods that you're going to be using. I'd always advocate where possible to do a bit of both. I think it's always of value to combine some methods, and you'll get a better result at the end of it. Just to cover off some specific methods, classically when we think about quantitative research, we think about surveys, and when we think about qualitative research, we probably think about interviews, one-to-one interviews, and these are probably the two methods that get talked about most often. They're great, they do a job, but they're certainly by no means the only ways of collecting data, and nor is this. But here's a kind of some other ways to think about. I'm not going to go through all of these in particular detail, but in terms of quantitative methods, yes, surveys are great. Also think about what access you might have to other forms of quantitative data, data that's collected amongst big samples of people. So you might have some good quality analytics, some website data or some shopping data that you can draw into and help kind of glean some insight from. Experiments I've put on there. What do I mean by experiments? Things like A/B testing, another kind of way of carrying out quantitative research. So typically obviously used in website development when you're trying to figure out whether to have a button here or there, or what position should it be, or what color should it be. That's a typical way of testing out and developing websites to try and make the whole experience for customers coming through websites more frictionless. In terms of qualitative research, interviews, yes, very good. Focus groups, I guess you'll all have heard of focus groups. There are specific reasons why you would deploy focus groups and not interviews. And there are specific reasons why you might want to do interviews and not focus groups. I guess without going into too great detail right now, if you're thinking about focus groups, think about the times when you might need to generate a bit of discussion. When the questions that you're asking would benefit from a little bit of group discussion. Trying to think of an example. It could be when you're talking about, like a shopping experience, for example. Could be that there's benefit in kind of bouncing things around a group. There's always the ability in a group discussion to check back with the group to see if they concur, do they agree or do they not agree with what's being said, which is something you can't do during an interview. But an interview itself, depending on the topic, can be much more of an appropriate method. Observation, it's a bit of an old kind of way of doing things, but I think actually has lots of merit. You'll probably hear lots of pushback against people when you come to talk about doing market research, because people don't believe people tell the truth on surveys or in interviews or focus groups, and so observing people doing things can often be much more insightful. That could be kind of online observation, or it could be physically. People, you can take people through a kind of shopping experience and just kind of observe what they're doing, maybe asking them questions. I think a lot of usability research is carried out this way, and when it is carried out this way, is good. You kind of spend a lot of time just watching people using websites and apps, not to ask them too many questions, but just seeing what they do, and then maybe follow up some questions afterwards. And then there are some methods that kind of sit between kind of quantitative and qualitative, if you like. They could be both, or they could easily sit in both camps. So I think desk research is something that maybe is slightly underrated, but certainly something I would recommend you think about before you embark on collecting fresh data. You know, does the data you're trying to collect, does it already exist somewhere? Are there reports that you can tap into or buy that kind of answer the kind of questions that you've already got? Social listening is relatively new. There's lots of tools in this area. Some of them are incredibly expensive to buy into, some of them less so, but the idea is that they're trawling and scraping data from social media platforms, from blogs, from Reddit and places like that. So you're basically instructing, creating queries for the platform to kind of work to collecting data. Can be really interesting. You can do brand, you can do kind of brand awareness tracking this way. So you can track the mentions of a brand online and sort of see how that changes over time. Maybe see how that ties in with your marketing activity. Or it can be used more qualitatively, so it might be something you want to kind of do a deep dive into. Again, you know, the benefit, I guess, of that is that it's you're tapping into conversation that's free from this kind of framework of research. So, if you like, you're tapping into kind of real life conversation, but it can be quite challenging to get a good set of data from that. And then diary studies, you know, again, a kind of useful tool if you're wanting to collect maybe like something more experiential. So if you're looking at shopping experiences and you want to kind of capture that experience multiple times, then a diary study might be more appropriate. So I think you know, I'm not going to be able to go into great detail about any of these today, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is that, you know, there are other options other than surveys and interviews, and depending on what you want to achieve and what kind of the objectives of your research, then that can lead you on to something potentially a bit different. Okay, so analysis and debrief. Again, you know, there are various ways of approaching data analysis, often depending on the type of data that you've been collecting. But broadly, I think there are three things you want to be doing here. I think you want to conduct your analysis within the framework of your objectives. So keep yourself within that kind of scope that you set yourself at the beginning. You're not going to be sort of wandering off down rabbit holes, therefore, and coming up with stuff that's not relevant. You know, that there might be a need to do that. You might actually, I often find with research that whilst you might have a set of objectives that you're working to, actually the research itself throws up something that you weren't expecting, and that isn't something you necessarily want to just discard because it doesn't fit into your framework. It could be something fundamental to your business or the organization that you're working for, and you don't want to just chuck that away. So yes, work to your framework, but I guess, you know, allow for things to come at you that maybe sit slightly outside of that could be quite insightful. Often it could be, you know, an idea that comes out of a data point or a comment that someone's made during an interview that could spark an idea for a new product. So again, you know, that's an interesting thing to capture, and is, you know, almost a bit of a byproduct of the research that you're doing. But the three things I would focus on, you know, have a good examination of the data, and, you know, there are various ways of doing that, whether it's survey data, if it's focus group data, if it's unstructured kind of textual data. The middle kind of icon there is referencing a kind of story. It's a bit kind of it's a bit hackneyed, this idea of kind of storytelling through data, but it's good. I think it works. I think if you can communicate a story to people rather than just presenting endless bits of data, you're gonna engage people. And ultimately the point of doing research is to engender some sort of change, and you need to engage people with that. So think about how you might be able to craft your story from the data that you've got, and then the kind of clapperboard there is to remind us to kind of make that actionable. So the things that you come back with from your research need to be actionable, need to be able to be relevant, be something that a business can instigate or do. It's no good coming up with something too kind of blue sky if the business isn't in a position to kind of action that change. So I guess kind of keep it real. Firstly, thank you very much for coming. I realized that was a very quick kind of whistle-stop tour through how to run a research project, and I don't expect anyone to suddenly feel like they could start doing this tomorrow, but I do hope that it's given you at least a sense of what you might be letting yourself in for if you start to do your own research, and I absolutely welcome anyone following up with any questions. I'm all for people doing their own research. I think it can be a very expensive thing to buy if you're going to use a consultancy like mine, and so I have been developing an idea over the last few months as to how I could help people do their own research through kind of a coaching service. So you do the work, you do it yourself, but you kind of use me to kind of guide you through that process, to help you make sure that what you get at the end, the outcome is as good as it can be. Because if using the analogy of DIY, which we all probably have tried to varying successes, it is quite easy to get it wrong. It's quite easy to do it, but it's I think it could be quite useful to have somebody there to kind of guide you and advise you along the way. But so that's an idea I'm kind of developing at the moment. There's more detail on my website, but it's 2:30, so thank you very much for your time. And as I said, there'll be more webinars. If you have any ideas of what you'd like to cover, research related obviously, then let me know, and I'd happily kind of schedule that one in. I'm trying to do one a month at least for this year, so yeah, hopefully see you again. Or if not, then I know that my job is done and I've given you enough. But yeah, have a great afternoon, have a great Easter, and chat to you later.